Hello, my name is Joanne Knight. Welcome to the barn. The next row up for the Pay It Forward quilt is actually row 5, but row 5 is part of the center of the quilt. So there's not really any blocks in row 5. Row 6 is the long horizontal row, and it's the one that had the most number of blocks in it. And then row 7 is also part of the center. So let's go with the center layout first. I'm going to go to that quilt group in my project, and this is what the center looked like. And whenever you look at that, it may look really complicated to you, but trust me, it wasn't. I'm going to go and find the pattern that is this pattern right here. That is not 2 or 3 different patterns that I put together. That is one pattern that is designed by Nancy Hackey. I'm going to pull it over to the screen. And if I hit the little I that is right down here in the bottom, that's called a large modern trapezoid, and it is by Nancy Hackey. And all I did was put it on 45 and put it into that space. I drew a boundary around the outside edges of that square and a square, and I placed that pattern. Slow it down to be able to make sure that all of these points hit where they need to hit. Then the rest of it was these little circle triangles that I mimicked on the 4 corners and then also put them in the center of it. I used a straight geometric triangle to be able to offset some of those circles. And if I select one of these circle triangles, you can see that that's 2 patterns. The reason that these triangles had to be 2 separate triangles instead of the way we do it in Skill Builder and create one triangle on the computer screen is because if I select half of these patterns, you can see that it's almost 16 inches tall. This center was taller than what my workspace was. So what I needed to do was quilt the top half of it, then roll it, delete the boundaries, and quilt the bottom half of it. I still did the bottom half in individual patterns. I did not take these top patterns and copy them and just place them on the bottom because I wanted to click new boundaries for all of this. The trapezoid was placed first because it anchored the patterns whenever I put that in there. So that's what I did on it. If I look at row 6 on the horizontal row, you can see what the whole row looked like. This one right here in the middle, this is a block made by my friend Debbie Tribble that I nicknamed Montana because she lives in Montana. So she had to take the bell block and give it a little bit of a cowboy twist with the spurs and so forth. And you can see that she signed it Montana. So this one was a little bit of a challenge because I didn't want to take a block pattern and just sit it on top of it. If I take these patterns and I copy them and go back to the image group, I'm going to once again take that image down a little bit so you can see how the patterns fit onto that block. I'm going to place these in here, size them down, and that's what I did. I gave her some pearls on her hat because it was too big a space not to put something on there. And I just wanted to have some texture in it and still be able to anchor the block. So that's what I did on her particular block. For the order of quilting on this, I did what I could reach in row 5. Then came back and put in the long horizontal row and those blocks. And then I did row 7, which was the bottom half of the center. This particular one right here This was a block that was made by Sarah Sorensen, and I wanted to be able to mimic the way that this block had kind of a frame around this star in the middle. So I chose patterns that would also give the outside edges of the block a star appearance. It wasn't real hard to do because I could click these out point to point. Now, when you look at this pattern right here, you're going to look at it and say, well, Joanne, as many times as you have told us, that is not a point-to-point pattern. And the reason that it's not a point-to-point pattern is because it's not on horizontal plane. Yes, the pattern starts on the left and ends on the right, but it's not horizontal. So if I click on this pattern and I left-click on Draw Pattern, it's going to tell me that it's not a valid point-to-point. However, I can take this pattern, go to F11 Handles. I'm going to snap it to the grid just like that. I'm going to right click and I'm going to left click on Save Pattern. I am going to save it to my database, and I am now going to say that it's a point to point, and I'm saving it to my project, and I'm going to hit Save and Close. And it places that pattern in my project. So let me get rid of this one. Let me go and find that pattern. I'm going to select the new pattern that I saved as a point to point, and I'm going to hold down the Control key. You think maybe I had a lot of patterns in this project? And I'm going to go back and find the pattern that is the small triangle, and I'm going to click on it, let go of the Control key, and now when I go to Draw Pattern, my clicking sequence is I am going to go diagonally across the top square. I'm going to go over the little triangle, and you can see that it's going in the wrong direction. Down, down, diagonally across like this. Now and that's pretty, but there's a couple of things that you can do on this. You want to trust your clicking sequence. That's what you want to do. We know that I clicked in these seam lines. So I'm going to take this pattern and I'm going to hit the letter Y on my keyboard, and I'm going to have my end snap on, and I'm going to snap it into place like that. You can do that, or you can pull this pattern to the screen and you can flip it and save it. Either way that you want to do it. So that's what I did, was either hit, and on the side it goes the letter X. So you can do it this way. Now what I have to do when I get through snapping these back into place, I have to select the first pattern and I have to order join to make sure they're in the right sequence. In this instance, those patterns, regardless of how you click, and remember I clicked clockwise, so let's click counterclockwise, and now you can see that the little triangle goes in correct, but the corner triangle does not. There's your good pattern too. You have to flip one of them, or you can place it on the screen and flip it and save it as a pattern. I only had one block like this, so since I only had one block, it didn't really matter to me that I had to turn around and flip this one. That was okay doing that. Let me get rid of these because I want to put the other patterns over it and see. When I did that, this block pattern left part of the block that was not quilted. So that meant that I needed to put another pattern in there to be able to take up that space. Placing this one on top so you can see what I did. And that's the look that this one gets, just like that. This pattern that I put in the center was this particular pattern right here and what I did on that. You've got two different ways that you can look at that. I can take it and do a circular array. I'm going to increase the number, and that gives me 8, and you can see the look that you get with that. I'm going to say OK. Then I'm going to take this same pattern and I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it over here. I'm going to hit the letter Y on my keyboard and flip it vertically, and I'm going to go back to circular array. Give me that, please, and say OK. And you can see that I have two completely different looks. I did not want all of this thread painting in the center, so I just flipped it and turned it, and that way I got more of the pattern that is going to be all of this density in the outside edges to anchor down these points, and the center was left open. Now, when you have a block that has an open center like this one did right here, you want to be sure and choose a pattern that kind of anchors down that center, because if you don't, it's going to kind of bubble on you. So that's what I did on that particular block. This block right here is another one that didn't have a name on it, so I don't know who made this block. It was one that I stopped and thought about for a long, long time. I used fill a lot in this one because I wanted it to look just like what the maker made it, that the patterns were floating behind each other because these color spheres were floating behind each other. So I just mixed it up with some ribbon patterns and some circle patterns and some straight line patterns, and then went back with one pattern that had both the circles and the straight lines in it to be able to do that. I did these sections one at a time. I drew good boundaries. I brought in the pattern. Let me bring that down some. I would bring in the pattern and position it the way it needed to be in the boundary. My mouse is really sensitive today. Once I have it positioned the way I need it to be in the boundary, I'm going to make a copy of it because I may have sized it differently than what the pattern is in the pattern properties, and I wanted it to match. So I would place it in the boundary, for instance, this bottom half of this ribbon right here, and do a fill. Then I would draw another boundary of the top, place the pattern in the top, matching it up with what was in the bottom, and do a second fill. Then you delete those boundaries and go on to the next section. So each one of these sections had to be done individually. The trick there is to make a copy of your pattern once you have it sized the way you need it to be, so that you make sure that you are matching what's already there. So that's what I did on that one. The next block in this section is this block right here. And I think they call this a 5440 star, something like that. But it was a pattern that was already designed. It fit the theme of the quilt because it had the bubbles on it. This pattern right here in the upper left corner was a different pattern. So I put each one of these in individually as well. They fit so well in the block that it was just perfect to place those patterns. Then once I put in the center and these corners right here, I just came back and added a little bit in these little tiny 60-degree triangles to give it density. I did put curved lines, a curved line pattern as a fill in this background area. You can't tell that very well from the picture because the picture's pretty intense, but there are curved lines right back here in this background area, and again I did a fill on those. So this particular block was just a series of placing pattern on pattern. It started with the center and being able to have a pattern that just fit perfectly in that center right there. The last block on this row is this sweet block right here by Melissa Green. This one had a house that was in the middle, and I wanted there to be texture in the background, so what I did was straight lines in the background. You can see if I select it that I divided this pattern up, because if I had done a fill on this entire set of straight line patterns, it would have gone round and round and round the house. So what you do in this case is just fill a section at a time and then put the line work behind it and fill the bottom section. So that's how you would accomplish that. And you can see that those are separate patterns. I will tell you that I learned a lesson on this one. I was going to put draw text in here and quilt out the barn in this little space right here. And I will tell you that block letters at a 1/4 inch are not very pretty, even if you do them at 20 stitches per inch. So take that lesson from me and don't attempt it unless you have more patience than I do, because I ended up taking those stitches out. There's just a really sweet little Sawtooth Star, Ohio Star template that's quilted right here just to give it a little bit of space. And it mimicked the block that was put here. These are Anita's background patterns, and they were tiny, tiny. I put them in point to point and placed them. So that block just had a little bit of texture. I did line work in this part of the roof, but it went horizontal instead of vertical so it wouldn't fight with the line work in the background. This is what the look was whenever I took that center and put around that center block, and it seemed only fitting that Belle would be in the center of this quilt. So that's basically row 5, 6, and 7. Thank you.